beginning was a beat.
What makes young people crave the rave?
I'm curious what makes you so curious. What makes you so curious.
In the beginning was a beat.
Welcome to the Rave Curious podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Glazer. What are we curious about? We're curious about electronic music and the culture that surrounds it. And how do we satisfy that curiosity? We do it by talking to some of the people who have dedicated their lives to electronic music, the DJs, producers, promoters, and more. My guest on today's podcast is Dustin Zahn. Dustin Zahn is a DJ and producer. He's probably best known for putting out records on Adam Beyer's Drumcode label. He also runs his own Enemy Recordings, which puts out a lot of really high quality techno. I met Dustin kind of the way all expats in Berlin meet each other, just hanging out at the club, mutual friends. I think the first time we really hung out, Derek Pleslako had invited him over to my flat for New Year's Eve, where we were, I was having a bunch of people over, and we were going to watch all the fireworks from my balcony. And I had met Dustin once or twice, so we didn't really know him very well. But of course, I told Derek it was, cool to invite whoever, and Dustin showed up probably at least an hour before anyone else. So then we kind of hung out, and after that point, we just kind of became friends, and logged a lot of hours hanging out at Berghain and Tresor and other clubs. I went and saw him play quite a bit. He actually, after we were friends, I started to actually see him play, and he became one of my favorite techno DJs. I've definitely seen him even at like the Drumcode party at Berghain. I remember Adam Beyer playing, and it was good, and it was cool, and it was fine. But then Dustin went on after Adam, and he tore the place apart. I remember even Adam was on the dance floor, all 7 feet of him, with his arms all the way up in the air, making him like 12 feet tall, while Dustin just wrecked the place. He's a really talented DJ, and a really great guy. So this interview is actually in two parts. The reason for that is Dustin also does a podcast similar to this one called REK'D, where he sits down and talks to some of his DJ friends. So we recorded this podcast. We recorded kind of all one long conversation in Berlin this past winter. It was a day or two after New Year's. We just hung out at Dustin's flat and talked for a few hours. So the first half is what you're going to hear now on Rave Curious. It's not the most peppy. It's not the peppiest podcast that we've put out here. I think Dustin and I were both a little burned out from the New Year's festivities in Berlin, which included, I think Berghain was open for 86 hours straight over that 4-day weekend. So, but we recorded about an hour. That is this podcast. And then we took a break. I had a coffee. Dustin had some vodka. And then we kind of went back and recorded another hour, which will be coming out on his podcast in another day or two. So this podcast comes out on a Tuesday. You can expect to hear the second half on REK'D podcast by Wednesday, Thursday at the latest. So here we go. Before we get started, just want to remind you that if you like this podcast, you can subscribe on iTunes. You can also follow us, Rave Curious Podcast, on Facebook or Twitter at Rave Curious. And if you really, really like us, go ahead and leave a review on the iTunes page. It'll help more people find the podcast. And don't forget to, once again, check out the second half of this interview in a day or two on Dustin Zahn's REK'D podcast. So here we go. Part one of conversation with Dustin Zahn. Funny, my heel's been messed up for the past few months. I was really nervous coming here, and I was like, man, I'm gonna end up having to be carried out of Berghain. Just my heel is such a mess.
Sit on the
and actually the best it's felt in the past month was when I was dancing at Berghain.
With the pressure on it, or was it because maybe
I think it's because like
or the heat or what?
I don't know what it was because like normally like it's always a little sore and then like usually if I like go running or whatever then it fucking like I'm like hobbled for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And
I got a pair of those compression socks from Maria's mom one year for Christmas, and they're kind of a bitch when you wear them because it's they're made for athletes and old people, so you don't get the blood clot buildup.
oh right, yeah.
And they're supposed to make your feet more comfortable. I only wore them once, but then I realized I had them on the wrong foot, and they're actually labeled left and right. I'm like, well, that would be why.
That would be why it did
they're
feel
really
right.
fucking uncomfortable for 12 hours. But I don't know, as far as intros go.
Hashtag DJ's complaining.
Exactly. I've been on that enough.
Do you remember the first time you made it on DJ's complaining?
What came first, Resident Unvisor or DJ's Complaining?
Oh, I don't know. I forgot about Resident Unvisor.
I don't think it's around anymore.
Yeah, because Wonderground just kind of came and kicked their ass.
Yeah. But the thing about Wonderground is that it's kind of low-hanging fruit a lot of the time. Sometimes they nail it perfectly, and other times it's just like really easy to phone some of these jokes in. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with easy humor. I like really dumb stuff too, but there's a lot to work with out there. I mean, there's so many characters and ridiculous things in this industry that there's a lot of good stuff, and I hope it gets stepped up at some point.
Have you made it onto Wonderground yet?
I hope not. I don't know. Honestly, I don't check any of that stuff anymore. But
I don't say it's just constantly like in my like Twitter feed and stuff like that.
I mean, I don't know. It's always coming up on my Facebook feed. Like people will post whatever is the new relevant joke or whatever, and those are usually pretty cool to at least see what's going on or whatever because it's relevant, and then I don't even keep up with the news anymore. But I'm not up to shit anyway, so there's really nothing to make a parody of when it comes to me. So
not yet.
Not yet. Hopefully,
you got to get a few more. Get the private jet.
I got to have the midlife crisis before I can make it onto Wonderground.
Right. That DJ's having midlife crisis. Hashtag DJ midlife crisis.
That really should just become a hashtag already, because, I mean, we're watching it unfold on a weekly basis, like every Monday and Tuesday. It's kind of incredible, like, when you watch these people, for better or worse. Like, some of them are kind of embracing family life, and some of them are, just going for the private jet photos or, like, pictures with tons of chicks or whatever. And it's kind of funny because, well, I don't know if it's funny, but they're going to be able to look back at that in a few years and probably have some... I don't think they'll regret the times for sure, but they're like, I don't really know that needed to be on the internet.
Yeah, I saw something like, I don't know, there was a series of like, for some reason, like every tweet by Diplo for like a week was like him with his shirt off.
Yeah.
And I was just like, it's really a shame that in 2015, Diplo has to take his shirt off to get people to pay attention to him.
Pretty much.
That's just not right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, actually, he's still relevant, right?
I think so, yeah. I think he's really relevant.
I mean, I know, I just saw, we were talking about Coachella yesterday. He's on or at least Major, is he still part of Major Lazer?
Yeah, well, he's on it twice. He's on Major Lazer and Jack U.
Oh, he's in Jack U also.
Yeah, it's like him and Skrillex.
Okay. Well, so yeah, he's still got things going on and whatnot.
Did you listen? I finally listened to that Jack U song, like the one with Justin Bieber, that apparently came out over the summer. And
well, the thing is I never heard of that thing at all until recently, and there's like, but there's that vocal something about like I want your body or something like that in it, right? Or is that a different Jack U? I don't know, but all I know is like I feel like this was a sample from a sample pack because I heard this in some tech house tracks like a year or two ago, and I thought, is this really? Because I don't think somebody like Diplo or these guys would go through a sample pack to grab.
Well, I know that the song they did with Justin Bieber, which was like the big hit, everything on that track was from his voice, was from Bieber's voice. Like even like the weird like flute sound that's kind of like the main hook, that like weird like thing that was actually.
I'll have to pull it up.
Yeah, it was actually like his vocal that they just like processed a million different ways and like came out with this weird sound.
I mean, I think Diplo's kind of a douchebag, but from a production standpoint, he really is a super talented producer. I'm not into the music at all, but, you know, when you look at it, you're like, and you know what you're doing on the computer or behind some drum machines.
My guess is that he is always working with people who know what to do on the computer, which is fine.
He's in the realm of getting shit done, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So like whether he's the whether he's the
Switch
melody
or-
guy
yeah.
or whether he's the actual deep dive into the software, which I mean that's something that like obviously it's more of a discussion in the EDM realm, the whole like ghostwriter thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's still really kind of a relevant thing even down on the underground level, whether it's techno, house, trance, drum and bass. It's incredible how many people have ghostwriters. A lot of the people have the same one or two ghostwriters in this scene, but with the EDM guys, it's I think they're a little bit more transparent about it though, or at least like there's a lot more writing credits. They kind of have to be because it's pop music now.
So everybody needs to get their proper credit and proper percentage.
I didn't watch I don't know if it was in the documentary or if it was just a YouTube thing, but wasn't there something basically where the Swedish House Mafia guys were like, oh yeah, this guy is writing our stuff, or we brought him into the studio to work with us, or I don't really know, something like that.
Maybe, and I don't necessarily have a fundamental issue with it.
I don't either.
Like, if first off, the technology is really hard, and there's a lot to it. So, the notion that somebody can only be credible within this genre if on top of, 10 other talents, whether the talent is, DJing or songwriting or has good hair or
Totally.
In addition you need to like master these really complicated machines and software like on all levels. That's potentially asking a lot, and there's no reason like you can't bring in somebody to work, part of it.
Bottom line is, what people don't realize is that nearly every band on the planet has had a producer on their album, and those producers are, I'm not going to say that they're solely responsible for getting this milestone album out or whatever, but it's a big part of the reason that those bands are who they are today and they're in the Hall of Fame. Because of course Pink Floyd, all those guys are killer musicians, but without a guy that really knows how to gel it together and mix it down right and everything, you wouldn't have had the albums that they have. Like Alan Parsons, he was a guy back in the day that was kind of in that whole realm of classic rock and everything. And when you look at his credits and you start tracing it back and forth, and you're like, wow, the reason all these things are kind of connected is because it's the same handful of people that are badasses. It was the same with pop music. I think he died now, but there was some guy in Sweden that was responsible for like 5 or 6 of the biggest pop acts in the 90s and early 2000s, and he had an early heart attack or something. But I mean, again, most of those people actually didn't have talent in that respect, but the reason that they're all kind of big is it boils back to one dude. So I think it's unrealistic to say that in dance music you can't have an engineer, but it's perfectly acceptable in other genres, whether it's like, hip-hop guy or a rock band or something like that. And I've also seen it firsthand in, techno and house mainly, where, Locodice is always very open about having a producer. He worked with Martin Budrich. And I don't really follow either what they're doing right now, but I know when I was a big fan of both of them, you could listen to the tracks side by side, and a Locodice track had a completely different feeling than Martin Budrich. At that time, they were both kind of relatively minimal tracks, but they sounded like two different producers.
Right.
So it was obvious that Dice's influence was felt in the studio. Then again, there's some people that just say, here's 10 grand, bring me music. They don't have any input. They just sit there on their phone on Facebook and they say, that sounds dope, and that's it. So there's a kind of a blurry line, but if done right, I think you can have an engineer and still be a credible act, per se.
Now, that said, you do all your own.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of a nerd like that. When I grew up, I was in a town of 7,000 people. I don't know how many are there now. So at that time, all there was to do was basically snowboard or drive around in your car and smoke weed, or I just made music, And so I have a pretty heavy production background, but there's a lot of people that don't. And I don't normally hold it against them, but I can tell you that I will definitely respect a lot more a guy who has put in the time does know what they're talking about.
Okay, so you grew up it was outside of Minneapolis, right?
Well, it was I was born in central Wisconsin, and then eventually when I was 8, I moved 2 hours north to Upper Michigan, a little town called Ironwood. And then when I graduated, I stayed for 1 year there for college, and then I bolted to Minneapolis when I was 18, and I was there for about 9 years. So, yeah, I mean, in that time, I kind of, it depends what you want to refer to as growing up. Like, I would say that, like, I didn't really grow up in central Wisconsin, because until you're 12 years old, you don't remember too much of it. I think it's like your teenage years, so it'd be a blend of Ironwood and Minneapolis. You know?
Yeah, I'm the same. Like I moved from Pennsylvania to Detroit when I was 10, so
Yeah.
Like, I would say like Detroit's what made me.
Exactly. That's where your influence is
exactly.
at,
That's
so.
where my taste developed.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, having been in the Midwest my whole life, it's easy to say, because really when it comes down to it, for anybody that hasn't been there, it's really hard to tell the difference between Wisconsin, Michigan, or Minnesota.
Yeah.
Or even parts of Illinois, for that matter. There's different tax rates for sales, and really, I think that's about all you can tell. Like Minneapolis is completely exclusive to Wisconsin, exclusive to like Minneapolis or Minnesota or Wisconsin, because there's no other cities really like it. You go 45 minutes out of Minneapolis, and it's just weird cabins and some old people and some crazy, lumberjacks on meth, and just like you wouldn't imagine that there's a 4 million person metropolis a half hour away.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly
it can
it goes from
dissipate.
that. Even like Detroit, which is quite a bit further east, and it's a more of a built up metro area, but still, you drive 45 minutes outside of Detroit, and suddenly people have kind of like southern accents. Like it gets weird real quick.
Mm-hmm. Almost like Deliverance with the banjos and stuff. And so, I mean, I don't know. I guess it's kind of a good thing because, us both having been in Berlin for the past 4 or 5 years, you kind of left recently. You kind of just see city life on a daily basis, and that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, the closest you're going to get to seeing like that backwoods life again is maybe some weird drunks on the train or something that you're like, well, what part of Germany did they end up here from on the wrong train?
Or Poland,
Poland
or something, yeah.
So, I don't know. I mean, I think it's kind of good for a kid to grow up in an atmosphere where you can get both environments like that,
Yeah. So when you were in Ironwood, though, that sounds like it was really... Upper Michigan, I guess there's Marquette, but...
Yeah, Marquette that was about 3 hours away, and that is a college town, but as far as I remember, there was not much of a scene going on up there at all.
Yeah.
We did have Duluth, which was a couple hours away, and it was kind of before my time. I heard there was a lot of parties going on, a lot of beach parties, and supposedly they were really cool, even according to the Minneapolis people and some of the Milwaukee people. I knew some of the guys that threw the parties up there. Some of them kind of helped me get started with DJing and whatnot. But for the most part, there was nothing in that area. But this was also the late 90s and whatnot, so everybody was driving all over the country to parties anyway. Like every weekend, if it wasn't snowboarding time, I was hitting the road to go to Chicago or Milwaukee or anywhere in the Midwest where there was a cool party going on.
Oh yeah, we would be in Detroit, and if there was nothing going on, Saturday afternoon, if there's nothing going on in Detroit that night, we would call our friends in Chicago, and it's like, what's going on in Chicago tonight? And if it was something good, we would just get in the car and drive 4.5 hours, and still get there in time to have dinner and go to the party.
Totally.
And then sometimes turn around and drive straight back.
Yeah, without any sleep or anything.
Which is
just
astonishing that nobody drove off a bridge or anything.
Well, and it's really easy to, these days being in Berlin, and it's now like everybody calls it the jet-setting techno capital or whatever buzzwords this week. But the thing is that maybe it's just me feeling like I'm getting old again because I hear about all these guys and girls that come in on EasyJet or Ryanair, one of these cheap airlines, to Berlin for the weekend for $120 round trip, and they just party all weekend in the clubs, maybe chip in on an Airbnb, and then bolt home Monday morning. And I'm like, man, I can't believe people just fly into Berlin to go clubbing. But then when I think about it, actually kind of less of an effort than it was for us to drive
Yeah.
around the country doing the same thing, and they probably get a better experience. You know what I mean? So
I don't know if it's better, but yeah, just
different, I guess.
It's less physically demanding than
That too,
having
you know.
to be in a car for 6 hours.
Mm-hmm.
At least you assume the EasyJet pilot isn't going to Watergate.
yeah, well, you want to hope so. Although there was one time on EasyJet, I know for sure one of the what do they call flight attendant, is that the proper word these days? I don't.
Oh yeah, the stewardess. I'll say it.
That stewardess. No, they had recognized me on the plane. They're like, oh yeah, they were telling me how they're going out tonight in Berlin, and I'm just like, fuck, I'm glad that I'm not going to be on your plane ride back tomorrow. Not that they're going to crash the plane, but
Yeah,
they're going to be all crabby.
Someone's not getting good service tomorrow.
Exactly. So, but I mean, it brings up an interesting point that I just thought of. So a lot of these kids these days are taking planes to get here. Maybe a train, but not so much.
The trains are more expensive.
Yeah.
which is weird.
Well, Americans have this. They're stuck on the old idea that the Euro Pass is the way to go, and like, oh, if you go to Europe, you got to get the Euro Pass. You can go anywhere, and that's kind of
don't think anyone
outdated.
does
It doesn't
that.
work
That's
like
yeah.
that anymore. And you're going to spend the whole time on the road. I mean, if I want to go to Amsterdam from here, it's 6 to 8 hour train ride.
Yeah.
Or it's an hour flight, and it's maybe $30 more. So everybody's flying now, and there's nothing wrong with heading to the airport and getting on the plane. But there was something cool about overfilling your car with a pack of friends and just hitting the road for a road trip. Fighting over the music or snacks, or someone needs to take a piss, or you know what I mean. There's a lot of that's.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of
trip
great
right
memories
there.
get made doing that. The road trip bit of it.
And so while they're definitely getting the party experience part of it, they're not getting the kind of camaraderie I think that maybe we got. And I'm not even necessarily saying that what we had was better or anything, but it's something.
But there is a difference.
There is a difference, and I think it means something. You know what I mean? And there's great stories too. Like I remember one time I had back when I was playing with Ian as the Attack people, we had a trip. Where was I going? I think it was Friday night we were supposed to play in Chicago, and Saturday night in Cincinnati or somewhere out that way, or Cleveland. I don't remember. But so we packed the car up with like 4 or 5 people, and my car, we started to take it on the road, and we didn't even get 20 minutes out of Minneapolis, and there was an oil problem with the car. Mm-hmm. So it was like leaking oil or something. We quick drove my car back. I borrowed my aunt's car. I got that down to Wausau, Wisconsin to pick up Ian, and I forget what the problem is, but that car started shit out on us. So we called another friend. He's like, yeah, I'll drive you down there. And he had like a nice BMW and stuff. So like, this is even better. We're going to be in a Beamer all weekend. We get about an hour outside of Chicago, and I don't remember what happened, but basically his car just dies. Like I think he did something and he warped the head, and like the long story short, when the tow truck came, he's like, yeah, you're going to have to buy a new car. So we thought that the next morning we're going to have to, he was just going to, he had some money, like, so we're like, okay, he's just going to buy a new car and we're going to go to Cincinnati. Well, we couldn't get a new car, so we had to rent one, and then we missed the gig from Chicago, but it took us basically 3 or 4 cars to get to these gigs.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? And
There was a while where I feel like I was like, I must have been the only one of my friends who had a credit card. Mm-hmm. So I was the only one who could rent a car. So I kind of became like the go-to guy.
Oh,
and
yeah.
yeah, it's like I remember like Derek Plazleco would be like, hey, so I got a gig in Lexington, Kentucky, a gig in Cincinnati, Ohio, and a gig in Columbus, Ohio. The promoter said they'd pay for a rental car. Do you want to rent the car since you have a credit card, and we'll hit the road for 3 days, and we'd be out there and we'd call friends and be like, dude, drive down tomorrow, and yeah, everybody would totally just travel around.
yeah, and I was kind of in the same boat. I mean, my first car was pretty much an ancient car that I inherited from a grandpa, but I had a license, so I was the driver basically. And the crappy part about that is basically everybody wanted to get home. As we were saying earlier, you just drive straight home. And I'd be the one that was responsible for driving.
Yeah.
And I, at this point, I was like completely sober, no drinking, no drugs or anything. So I was just completely exhausted. Everybody else, what the hell is going on outside?
The snowstorm, and people want to get home.
Yeah. So,
That's unusual though. People don't usually honk their horns in Berlin.
It's pretty bizarre. The only thing that'll ever happen is taxi drivers doing that. What was I talking about?
Driving.
Yeah,
home.
so anyway, it'd be
being the only
7
guy
in
with
the
a
morning,
license.
everybody's passed out in the car, and then they want to put on, like, I don't know, some mellowed out indie rock or, like, the old Autechre albums or, you know, the early chill out stuff. And I'm like, I loved all that stuff, but I'm like, dude, I'm fucking falling asleep. Put something that's hammering on or whatever because you guys aren't keeping me awake. And then I try and change it, like, dude, what the fuck? You know, and I'm like, come on, man. I'm the one driving, you know? And
You're just like pounding gas station coffees.
exactly. Well, this was even before coffee, so it was probably like Mountain Dew or something terrible, you know? But, yeah, I mean, so as much as those times either sucked or they were great, you know, those are still stories that you will kind of remember forever. And I think these days if you're doing this jet set lifestyle, you're more than likely to be like, oh my God, I went through security and I didn't check my pockets before we left the club. And like, that's probably what those kids are worried about, or, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, I assume like, you know, in America now, I got to assume there's still, my part of it's just that America has a driving culture and you're in Europe most of the time where there's just not a driving culture regardless.
Yeah.
You know, so I got to assume like, you know, when there's these big festivals, like people, you know, kids are probably driving, you know, maybe even for days to go to these festivals, like, you know, driving halfway across the country to go to a festival. But then maybe it's like, you know, it's like once a year they do it or, you know, a few times a year.
Detroit's still an example of that. There's still a dedicated, you know, there'll be 30, 40 people from each big city that will drive out there.
Yeah.
I mean, at that rate, it kind of makes sense because you can shove, let's say, 4 or 5 people in a car and spend $100 on gas as opposed to flights, because flights in the States are still outrageous.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I do love the fact that it does feel like that happens everywhere. I mean, I remember going to Decibel Festival in Seattle, maybe like 2005, 2006, something around that. And at that point, I was living in Los Angeles, where you don't really drive anywhere. You know, you drive without the city, but LA is so isolated. There's not like other places to drive to so much. But yeah, we were like up there the first night. We went and met up with some friends. We were having dinner with these dudes from Montana, and I'm like, Montana, like nothing is more far flung than Montana. And I'm talking with these guys, and they're like, you know, they're telling us like, you know, they'll do like a party a month in Montana, and they'll do like 800 people, which in Montana, like I was like, I couldn't fathom it. But it's they're like, well, you know, it's Montana, so there's absolutely nothing going on. So once a month we throw a party. The once a month we throw a party, every person between the age of 18 and 30 comes to this party, and it's really it's only, you know, it's maybe like a 10-hour drive from Montana to Seattle, and they would do that. They just shuttle back and forth between Montana to Seattle, and it really, I remember definitely just getting this feeling of like, oh, I know these guys. Like I'm just meeting these guys, but like, I know these guys. I know this type of person.
Yeah, I've been there to some degree.
Exactly. It's definitely like kind of a kindred spirits.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of had that revelation years back too. Like 4 or 5 years. I've first played in Italy like 2006 or 7, and then it was really only about 4 or 5 years ago that I ended up playing there a lot. And one of the interesting things about Italy is it's not just about Rome or Milan or these kind of big cities with, you know, tons and tons of people, but there's a ton of gigs every weekend in these small-ass towns. So, you know, I'd be sitting in the car and we're driving to the club, and how many people are going to be playing, or how many people are going to be in the club tonight? Oh, yeah, about 2,000. Okay, but you're going through this little town. You're like, well, how many people are in this little town? They're like, 1,500. I'm like, whoa, so there's going to be more people in the club than the town. They're like, oh, yeah, but it's one of those things where all the kids come from
the whole region, yeah.
And I'm thinking, like, man, that's bizarre. But then I think about it, and I'm like, oh, that's what we did in Wisconsin all the time when I was the same age. So, yeah, I mean, that definitely still exists, but yeah, on a much smaller degree.
But yeah, some of the first parties I went to, it was even before I was, you know, into it. It was more just like, this is the thing that's happening this weekend. So, you know, everybody who plays in a band, everybody who, you know, wears fat pants, everybody who, you know, and anybody who is a, you know, from an, you know, alternative youth culture, this is what everybody's doing. You know, everyone's going to see Richie Houghton at the Bingo Hall outside of East Lansing, Michigan, because it's the only thing in the, you know, for the general Michigan State populace that isn't a frat party that weekend.
Totally.
So it draws everybody.
Yeah, and that's a thing, and or it'd be the opposite, like somebody that's so very rarely in the States to perform, whether it's, I don't know, let's just say Carl Cox or Marco Carolla or something like that, which back then was kind of a rarity, but now it's like, when aren't those guys in the States, But at that point, people would drive, even though there might be, when raving was in its heyday, maybe there would be 20 parties going on within a 4 or 5 hour radius that weekend. I'm sure most of them were crap. But you drive further to that one because it's like, that guy's never over here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do find that interesting that there's there's seems to be a lot more. Yeah, obviously there's a lot of European DJs going to America regularly now.
Yeah.
Which part of me is kind of like, haha, because they're the ones who have to do the crazy international flights.
Yeah.
I guess they're doing them business class, and everybody's making a lot of money.
They got the money. They do the business class flights, but. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting because, on my podcast so far, I don't know if it wasn't definitely not intentional, but it just happened to be that I've had a lot of American promoters and DJs on and stuff. And the state of the scene in America has come up a bit. And I've played in the States a bit in the last few years, but I'm not playing there so much these days. And some people, it's really interesting because some people feel that it's incredibly healthy right now. And some people think that it's more or less dead. And I think, it's just, you could say the same thing about Europe, because people in Europe will say, oh, Europe's dead. But you could talk to the guy who's doing 12 gigs a month, and he'll say, what are you talking about? Mm-hmm. It is interesting, because you see a lot of these guys, maybe it's because now they're on William Morris or one of these bigger agencies, they can just kind of farm them out to any festival, because they kind of sell DJs or live acts or bands in kind of bundles now. Sure. So, maybe, what was that Diplo thing? Jack U? Mm-hmm. Maybe if they want to hire Jack U, there's a lot of times where you're like, well, you're picking up 10 other acts.
Yeah. Well, that's gone on. That's gone on forever.
No, that's always been part of it. But now some of these people that were very rarely coming to the States are now in this bracket where either there's legitimate demand for them, or they're kind of just getting thrown into the fold, and they get to, play these really odd gigs in the States. Mm-hmm. Some of them are really happy with them, and other people say, I've tried some of these kind of EDM festivals, and it's just not working. Everybody's kind of different, you know what I mean?
But that was, I definitely remember getting calls like, oh, well, you want to book Carl Cox? Okay, well, we have this other DJ that we want to book, next month. So he can kind of, check out the club. We want to, work with you guys once before. And there was definitely those kind of games that you would have to play.
But I think it's a good thing though, too, gets, that's how you breed talent overall. Mm-hmm. And so.
Yeah, but it also seems like it's mostly, of the techno scene that's coming up in America. And that's definitely, that's definitely kind of the next thing, whether it gets, stadium filling EDM huge, nobody knows, but it's definitely like within the clubs, and they're, the second stage at the EDM festival is now a lot of techno. It's mostly Europeans who are headlining those things, whether it's Loco Dice or Chris Liebing or Adam Beyer. Yeah. Like the guys who are already huge names here, as opposed to.
That's because it's all packaged in, it's owned by a lot of the same people in the company. So it's just sliding them over to the next event. And there's nothing wrong with that, because honestly, there's a lot of people that want to see those guys all the time. There's a reason that people like Liebing or Beyer can play in New York multiple times a year, or London for that matter. You know what I mean? So that's definitely part of it. But the thing that I found interesting about the States, and when I talk to people, is what they're kind of interested in, what their perception is of things is definitely different. And that's going to be the case because there is a geographical difference. There's a ocean in between us. But you would think the internet would close that gap a lot, and it does a good job, but it doesn't close it completely. So I think in the States you'd still have, let's say in terms of techno right now, there's still a preference, I think, for definitely the harder, darker side of techno. Mm-hmm. And the States really is still supportive of not hometown heroes, but, like stateside producers like, the Droid guys and, a lot of those acts that are playing more of the pump and sound and kind of pushing the American thing. Those people still get pretty nice turnouts in the States. Whereas if you want to book, let's say whoever's the hot shot at Tresor or Berghain or wherever this month, they'll probably get an okay turnout in like whatever city, Chicago, New York, whatever. But you would almost think, well, judging on how hot they are in Europe right now, that it would just blow up in the States. And a lot of the stateside people don't care about some of these guys, to be honest,
Interesting, because I've seen like having been in the States for such a long time, and then 4 years in Berlin, and now being back in the States, I'm seeing like all of a sudden like the Berghain guys are the ones that are playing the big parties, and like the Droid guys, they have their own, they build their own thing in L.A. So they can draw in L.A., but I don't know that they draw anywhere else outside of L.A. other than Europe.
Yeah,
so it's there's always been that thing though. It's if you want. If you want where you're from to appreciate you, you have to go away. It's always people always want that other thing. I mean,
I had a pretty good thing going in the States when I did play there. But yeah, of course, and I was playing somewhat regularly, but it wasn't until I left that there was a slightly better caliber of gigs or more frequently. I was playing in New York at least once or twice a year over the years since I started, but these days I do it about 4 or 5 times a year now, and I'm more or less exclusive to Output. So, these are kind of things that I don't think would have been an option for me had I stayed in the States.
Right, and that's really cool. I mean, you've been doing some like all night long things at Output, or like just like one other DJ.
Yeah,
which is awesome.
Or in the Panther. Yeah, I mean it's. Those are the kind of things that everybody kind of has something they're going for, whether it's more gigs or more money or label nights or something. And for me, it's always about trying to, if I can, like, tell a story over a longer span of time. And that's what I hope to do more at other clubs. And I've actually, this past year, it's been borderline too many marathon sets. But, once people do catch on, and even if it's like only 3 or 4 hours, but you do those 2 nights a week, 4 weeks a month, it gets to be a lot of time behind the decks, and you kind of got to start limiting yourself. And there's some clubs that just, it's not that they're bad clubs, but they're only really good for 2 or 3 hour sets and not 6 to 8 hours because
maybe the crowds don't stay that long, or
even if the crowds stay that long, it's really tough to play a set. Like there's some clubs where the dance floor is not elevated. I don't like the stages that are 10 meters high or anything, but where it's just about a foot or two above everybody's head where you can see the whole floor. That's kind of perfect in my opinion, because when you are doing a 6 hour set and you see the same 15 people in front of you for 8 hours, it's hard to tell what's going on behind them. You can get an idea obviously if you're doing a good job or not, but it's those kind of small details that really help the 6 to 8 hours go by or change the vibe. And, the sound, the monitors, if those are good, your ears can start ringing if the monitors are shitty. So you really have to be careful about the places you choose to play at for these longer sets, because there's some times where I've agreed to do all-night sets for 8 hours. And it wasn't even necessarily that the party was bad, but by 2 hours in, I'm thinking, shit, I'm kind of ready to go to the hotel because it's just not the right setup. It's not that it's not comfortable. It'd be great to play for 2 hours, but it's being here for that long it's gonna be a long slog. Yeah, I mean, you could say the same thing about going to your favorite bar or restaurant or even like a park or something. Some spots are just better for longer stays than others.
So now let's go back to let's talk about your history a little, because I think I honestly don't even know your history that well. Like you kind of. We became friends just like a few years ago. You were kind of like this like fully formed, entity.
I just showed up.
So, and then like we've talked like just as friends, we've talked about like you told me stories about like growing up and things like that. But I'd actually like I don't know your professional arc, so maybe some other people would want to learn it as well.
Yeah, why not? Where do you want to start?
I'll start with.
I mean, long story gets longer.
Yeah. When did you first?
Around 97, 98. That was kind of, things were kind of popping off in America for let's not say what did they refer to as back then? Electronica.
I guess that was the
on the
start of
radio you had
electronica.
like Chemical Brothers, Prodigy, and all that shit at the time. So it wasn't like electronic music was pretty big in the late '90s.
Mm-hmm.
People think that the EDM thing now is it's finally broke, but it broke 15, 20 years ago.
Right. And at that
So-
point, you were.
I was
how old?
young.
You were.
I mean, when I first started, I was 14.
Okay.
And I wasn't even into DJing. I had a computer, and I really liked listening to music, and I heard whatever electronic stuff was trickling my way, whether it was Kraftwerk or Prodigy on the radio or anything like that. I'm like, well, that's pretty cool. I've never heard sounds like that before. Then I wound up getting a computer program like Rebirth or whatever, just downloading a cracked version like a lot of people do. Screwing around, I didn't think much of it. And then I was making some stuff, and some friends were like, "Oh yeah, you're into that rave shit." I'm like, "The fuck is that?" I never. And so like, "Oh yeah, well there's these all night parties, and people play this stuff, and blah blah blah, and they get wasted." And the first thing that I thought when I heard this, I'm like, "That sounds terrible." You know what I mean? Like I had no interest in it. I was hanging around with like what did my guidance counselor in high school called them? He's like, "Oh, you hang out with the what do they call them? Outcasts?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, you're a dick." But so Slayer and all that stuff was kind of the name of the game, and I was into Rage Against the Machine and all that. So I had no interest in going to that stuff necessarily, but I ended up getting dragged into a couple of those parties anyway over the time. And the first one or two that I went to, I wasn't really into because there was a lot of people that I knew that were dressing really weird and not necessarily being real about things. Like I feel like they read a magazine or watched a movie and they're like, "This is how you're supposed to act at a rave." So I wasn't really fully convinced, but I loved the music. I ended up meeting through my stepsister. She dated briefly who would become my production partner, Ian Lehman. He had a pretty big techno career. Well, I don't know, like he was doing a lot of stuff back then. And so we started hanging out a lot all the time, playing video games, making music together. And I just decided that I wanted to start DJing because I go to these house parties and these raves, and everybody was just bringing milk crates of records over and like hanging out and having a drink or smoking some weed and playing records all night long for fun. And if I wanted to play music, I'd have to bring out, by this point I had some gear or bring my computer, and it was just a pain in the ass. I'm like, I'm going to buy records.
Oh, because back then, like, it wasn't a laptop. It was,
No.
I remember seeing, like, some
You bring a
big names.
yeah.
Like setting up, like their computer towers,
Yeah.
and their big full-size monitors to do live sets, like in weird warehouses.
And at that point, I wasn't really, I didn't really care about playing out necessarily, but I wanted to be part of it. Like, I think it's an exciting world. Like, if anybody gets into it now, or if they've been into it for a while, everybody's something. They're a DJ, they're a journalist, they're a booking agent, like, because everybody wants to be a part of it somehow. Although what we need most right now is music fans. You know what I mean? But but I get it. It's a fun thing to be a part of, and obviously I wanted to too. So I bought some records that I thought were awesome that nobody else was playing. At that time, I was trying everything out, from like early Stuart Walker to a lot of drum and bass, and everything. Just at that age, you're kind of like learning what you like, finding your taste. And then finally by 99, 2000, being young, I just wanted banging techno. And a lot of the UK stuff at the time was kind of hitting it for me, but it was a little bit more ravey than I was looking for. So I settled into a lot of the old, like Marco Carolla and Adam Beyer type stuff, because it was very moody and like, that Jeff Mills inspired loopy stuff that
we
is
call
more
it,
textural.
We called it tracky techno, or maybe I just call it tracky
loopy,
techno. But yeah,
whatever. And which is funny because
BPM.
I remember being so into it at the time, and a lot of people that have been into techno since like the early 90s were like, "Man, that shit's boring. That's bullshit." It wasn't even necessarily that they didn't think it was cheesy. They're just like, there's nothing to it, because they were influenced more by, like, let's say old Woody McBride records or the really ravey stuff. You know what I mean? And this was a little bit more introspective or something like that. Definitely deeper. So yeah, from there on, I just started playing those kind of records and making those kind of tracks, and around 2001, I think, or 2002. I gotta check, but that's when I started putting out my first records. And yeah, it's all kind of history from there. Slow incline.
So, who put out your first records? Did you do it yourself or?
No, well, actually, that was the plan, because I never thought that there was no like, let's become a big DJ or anything like that. I didn't even know you could get on a plane and go do this shit, you know? We were playing records at a house party, and I thought, man, it would be really cool to see your little name on a sticker spinning around. And then I just looked it up online, like, what would it take to do this? And it was not that expensive to get going, like, I don't know, $1,500, $2,000, which is a lot of money. But I mean, come on, if you save a little bit and you work hard, you live with your parents, it's not that hard to make some money. So I went for it, and we started to make our own record. But in the meantime, I got deals with Invasion, which was a label based out of Belgium, ran by I want to say like Zeno from Zeno and the Filterheads. There was like this big Belgian music group that had some Marco Bailey labels and stuff like that. Because back then, I mean, it's still prominent now, but you know, and you had this big Frankfurt techno scene, which had all those like Chris Liebing type labels and Michael Berghain and stuff. And this is one of those labels from those label groups, but in Belgium. David Bitterman put out one of my records on his Livewire.
David Bitterman from Detroit.
Yeah, D-Bit.
Yeah, okay.
And, you know, so I had some stuff stateside and stuff there, and then finally I put out a record on my own label that lasted 7 releases. You know, I ended up putting out a bunch of stuff after that, but without looking at it, I don't really remember.
And at this point you were in Minneapolis, yeah?
Well...
When did you move to Minneapolis?
No, I moved to Minneapolis in 2003, so by the time I got there, I already had probably 5 to 10 records out.
Okay.
I think.
That were done in Ironwood, Michigan.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, let's see, I want to say like 2004 is when it really started hitting a lot. You know, ever since the first record, people like Liebing and Beyer and all those guys that are really big now, they were really supportive of my records. They were playing them a lot. And, I started getting bigger record deals with people like Glenn Wilson for like, wasn't Planet Rhythm, Compound maybe, like some of those kind of UK labels. I did, and Johan Bachto, he had Mankind and Skunk Works, and this was like that kind of, I don't remember which wave, but it was the wave of Swedish guys after Adam and Joel and them. And so that kind of brought everything to a new level to have a few releases out there. And it was really starting to pick up steam because I was doing my solo thing and also the Attack people with Ian. We would do like, I think we did Awakenings Festival in Amsterdam and some gigs over here. But at that point, that was when minimal started to break. And so just as we were really starting to hit it with bang and techno, that whole market just fell out.
Yeah.
And at that point, I had to start over, basically, from the ground up. And it was pretty tough. So,
but you didn't make minimal records. You didn't like...
Well, I thought I did, but I listened back to them, like, I don't know, maybe 4 months ago when I found a hard drive. And they were so shitty. I mean, like, a lot of the minimal stuff back then wasn't really minimal. And we knew that. We were joking. We're like, it's not minimal, it's maximal. Because it's 18 different sounds going on in the track, but it's all just little snippets. I mean, the thing about that stuff is it really forced me to become a better producer in the sense that you're supposed to practice the whole less is more approach. And also, it forced me to try to do other things besides just making drum loops. And I learned to use the synthesizers better and stuff, so it was good. And also at that point, yeah, by the time the minimal stuff did come in, I was getting pretty burned out on techno too. I was listening to a lot more, industrial type techno at the time. Terrence Fix, Merkill, Memory Crash, and stuff like that. Because it was
like that. Yeah, there was like that edge of.
Yeah,
it was kind of electro clash, but it was
very gothic.
Yeah, DJ Helga, the
Matinee,
EBM, electric body music or whatever.
Yeah, I was playing. I mean, people still play Nitzareb records all the time, but I was playing a lot of that, and I bring in Neubauten and stuff. And
the best person to talk about that stuff with is Adam X.
Yeah,
'Cause he breaks down into.
I had him on my podcast. We went into it, and
yeah, I did it like an email interview with him, and he will explain to you the intricate differences between EBM and industrial and electro, and God, and like reference labels from the 80s that when the split happened between the two camps.
He schooled me a little bit. Like, I mean, I knew roughly, but he definitely corrected details on like, get it right. This is how it should be. And so I was kind of into that at that point for a while. And actually, I really was a big fan of minimal stuff at that point. Like 2006 or 7 was a big period for that stuff. And so I was into it, but I was playing it actually a lot for some bookings and whatnot, but it wasn't really me as a artist or whatever. You know what I mean? I had the teenage American angst in me still, so it didn't make sense to try and make Luciano ripoffs or anything.
Gotcha.
But well, yeah. So I was getting tired of everything. But let's just move forward a little more quickly. It wasn't until like 2007 I got a message from Adam Beyer, and he's like, "I'm relaunching Drumcode. I want you to be part of it." And that was huge at that point, and probably was the biggest thing for me since then, because at that point, it was very hard to be on Drumcode. It was only open to Swedish people, and it was still very exclusive. There was only like a handful of guys that were going to be part of the label. And it took me almost a year to get the record done for him. He rejected a lot of things, and I'm glad he did, because they were really bad.
So did you? I mean, were you like friends with Adam at that point? You said he had already like he knew your records and played your records.
Yeah, we stayed in contact. We weren't like bros or anything, but definitely in good contact, and we became closer. And now I'm happy to say that I consider him a really good friend. He's helped me out a lot. But at that point, we were in cahoots, but we weren't tight. And I didn't want to jinx this whole deal with Drumcode, so basically I just decided that I was going to not tell anybody until it was done and the contract was inked. And that was a whole year, which kind of sucked, because people are like, "Oh, what are you up to?" And I'm just like, well, nothing. You know what I mean? But really, like, I was up to some shit. And then after that, I did, I don't know, a handful of releases for him or something like that. And, when True Soul was still forming, I did stuff on there and whatnot. And since then, my next label, Enemy, that had been taken off in the meantime. So there was a lot of things going on that really just kind of helped propel it forward. And then, around 2010 or 11, I finally decided that I was playing enough that I'm like, I can come to Berlin and make it. Because I thought about moving to Berlin around 2006 or 7 with one of my ex-girlfriends, and she was kind of up to move to Europe also, but we're like, well, I don't know if I want to struggle in another country alone without any friends or family. I'd rather struggle at home and still have the support of them around me. And honestly, I think if anybody's listening that's kind of at that crossroads right now, I think that's a good way to do it, because it's not, some people handle loneliness better than others, but even when Berlin was kind of hopping off at that point, I didn't feel like it was necessary to be there, and I don't think it's necessary to be here now. It can help depending on who you are as a person or what you're doing, but I would rather have just stayed home and focused there and had those people around me.
And how healthy was like Minneapolis at that point, as far as
it, like parties, or
as far as like being able to work, or was it more like go back there, do the work, and then still have to come to Europe every
that's a thing though, because at that point I was traveling every weekend, whether it was in the States or Europe. It was really starting to take off, and I was still working a desk job at the time, and it was pretty lucrative, so I couldn't give up one or the other. So there was a lot of, like, no joke, there was times where I'd leave the office. I'd take off Friday, for example, and I'd leave at 4 p.m. or on Thursday. I'd go straight to the airport from work with my suitcase. I'd go to Japan, play a gig, and I'd come back Sunday night, and I would land about 1 a.m., Monday morning, and then go back to work at 6:30 on Monday morning.
That's insane.
And I would do that I was doing South America a lot, and back then I could do it because I was in my mid-20s, but now it would kill me immediately. But and those are the things, like, even if the gigs weren't the best paying at that time, first of all, you don't want to say no because they're exciting gigs, but you can't turn down those kind of offers when you're still kind of coming up in your career because they might not come back to you. So I just had to really hammer it hard, and it was a little brutal, but obviously it's paid off over time. And, there were still gigs in Minneapolis to do at that point, too. I was promoting a lot, so it was still exciting times,
Yeah, I mean, I know almost nothing about the Minneapolis scene. Like, I kind of like the Minneapolis, like 90s rave scene, and maybe a little bit like what's going on now through friends, but...
The thing is
I
that
DJ'd the Dinky Towner once.
Yeah.
I think
Well,
we've
that
talked
was
about
that was a happening spot for a while. I mean, the really interesting thing about Minneapolis, and I moved there in 2003 or 2, something around there. Minimal. I mean, it was sort of starting to pop its head up in Europe, but it was not really a thing yet. It was still kind of a niche genre. And when I got to Minneapolis, minimal was already huge. There was like James Patrick was doing the thing at the Dinky Towner every week, and like all these guys that were playing house music or even banging techno records, they all knew a lot of like really cool minimal acts. And so there was a point when Minneapolis, and long before the minimal thing too, Minneapolis was kind of ahead of its time. They had like Woody McBride and Missile Records and Freddie Fresh and all that stuff going on. DJ Slip. There was definitely things going on, and when I got there at that point, they were ahead of the game with minimal. But after minimal kind of broke, and it stayed popular in Minneapolis for a while, it started to lose kind of the forward-thinking attitude that it had. Some of it was because people were having a little too much time with drugs. Some of them just grew up, and there was like kind of this stagnant period for that scene, and I think it happened for a lot of cities too, where there was almost like a 3 or 4 year generation gap that got missed for bringing in new party kids or new. I mean, we had the first, we had all the Marcel Detman and Ben Klock and those guys. We had them when they were $600 bookings and stuff before anybody would book them, but it wasn't like nobody knew what was going on there. They're just like, okay, let's go out and see who these guys are. And even since then, it's really not as forward-thinking as it used to be, but it is still a healthy scene. Like, you got badass speaker stacks. When it is a good party, it's incredible. I was just talking to Ben Sims. He was just there for his second time a couple weeks ago, and he's like, yeah, both times on my last couple trips to the States, Minneapolis was by far my favorite spot.
So, and who's pushing things there? I mean,
you got my friend Mike Gervais. He does System. He's doing parties now. I have a partner that I do parties with named Steve Centrific. He's still doing things.
He's old school. He's like old.
Oh yeah,
drum bass
he's
affiliated.
He's like kind of. He's not quite Grandpa Raver yet, but you know what I mean. Like he's at that kind of Godfather status. Then of course you got Zach Devious One, but he's not really a party promoter. He does his own night where he plays and one of his friends plays like every few months, but he's not really bringing in any people or booking any locals. And there's a couple other people that are still trying to do things once in a while, but nothing on a.
And there seems to be like a sound system culture, like many, like I guess maybe this because like everyone back in the day used to talk about like Woody McBride's wall of bass.
Yeah,
and I know like Zach like owns a serious sound system.
Yeah,
and,
well,
like Steve is always like when I see Steve's posts on Facebook, they're often like about Function One speakers or whatever.
It's funny you mention that because the thing is, in the last month, it's actually blown out of control. Zach just got a bunch of new turbo sound, and I mean the system that he has now, I don't remember. He'll be on the show and go into detail about it, but it's ridiculous. It's enough for a festival. And in the same process, because he didn't need so much, he helped like Steve and Mike and these other guys out. So now basically anybody that's promoting a party in Minneapolis has a badass turbo sound system.
Just has access to their own.
Everybody has their own system, and then if there's a bigger party, then you just join forces and borrow each other your system. So now it's like you have enough sound minimum that you own for 300 people for dirt cheap. Or if you're going to do a massive party, you just call your friend and be like, you owe me one. And then you got this insane system for like 1,000 people or something. So, and it's not just a bunch of shitty boxes. This is really high-quality sound. That being said, the wall of sound that Woody did, a lot of those boxes were not always high quality. You know, it was often a lot like Stairway to Heaven, or one of these parties. There was like 128 dual 18-inch bins, if I'm not mistaken. Did you go to that at all? Or
no, I've
Josh
heard
Rankin stuff.
Really, like heard of that party, but I didn't.
So, but the thing is a lot of those boxes over the course of the night. Well, not a lot, but some would definitely blow out because that's what's going to happen with 128 boxes.
Yeah.
And I don't know. In the end, you have this culture that, you know, nowadays at festivals and clubs, they fly the highs, which for people that don't know techniques, it just means they hang them from the roof. And then the bass is on the floor. And at warehouses, you don't have time to bring in a crane and fly the high pack. So it's like you just stock up the bass as high as you can, and then you put the highs on top of it. Because if the high packs are in front of your face, your ears are going to melt off.
Yeah.
But if it's up in the air, then your ears aren't ringing. So that's kind of the gist behind having a wall of bass. And it was kind of like a dick measuring contest, really. So it wasn't actually Woody that invented it. And if you talk to him, he won't take credit for the invention of it. He definitely improved upon it. But it was actually another guy from Minneapolis who passed away. And he used to do a lot of parties, house parties, bringing in like people like Larry Hurd and people of that nature, House Nation Under Groove. His name was Thomas, DJ Mannix. And he was the guy that kind of had this idea, like, let's just get as much sound as we can and throw it in a small spot. And Woody took that idea and really ran with it. And kind of an interesting fact, Zach Devious One, he bought the massive record collection from Mannix once Mannix died. So this is like a guy that's really a godfather because he decided we're all going to have big sound systems now and we're all going to buy a lot of records. And so that's still trickling down years later.
Yeah,
you know
decades
what I mean?
later.
And I think every city kind of has those stories. I hear about that in New York all the time. Not necessarily big sound systems, but like how this guy has kind of set the precedent for everything that's going to follow.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Like I just I think it's coming out today or tomorrow. I did one of these podcasts with Danny Tenaglia. And you know he famously, like, he has his loft out on Long Island City, and he has the sound system that was at Vinyl, which was the last club in New York where he did his residency, and Body and Soul was there. And it's like, wow, you have a club level sound system in your loft. And he was talking about how he just bought the system from another club, called District 36, which I guess wasn't very long lived. It was like
I don't think it actually officially opened.
I had never heard of it, but he bought their system too. So it's like how many high grade nightclub systems do you have sitting around your house? Yeah, sort of thing. But
well, the thing about sound systems is if you know what you're doing, you know the right people, it can be a lucrative business.
Sure,
because there's for example, that sound system that he bought, I don't know what he does with it, but it's very possible that he could have that system shipped to LA to be used at as part of a system at a Lady Gaga concert or something. There's a lot of corporate events or stuff like that this stuff gets used at. So you'd be surprised. A lot of these people will buy these systems up, and it's not a bad investment. And then when you want to throw a party, you have the mother of all systems. So.
I guess that's true. I mean, there was the guys in the big guys in Detroit were Burst.
Yeah,
Mike Fotis. I forget what his company's called now, but at this point he does sound at events, festivals all over the country. But I remember there was one party. It's a party that didn't happen, but it was like Richie Hahn was supposed to be doing a party in Windsor, and it basically got busted the morning before the party was supposed to happen.
Was that when he got banned from the States for
No, this was quite a few. This was the Dex Effects and 909 release party, so it would have been like November of '99. But he had said, they had basically had the whole event set up already, and the police came by and were like, "This party's not happening." So and Burst had a warehouse downtown, and it was just decided, okay, we're going to try to do the party here. And literally at like 8 a.m., the day of the party, we started moving every speaker they had up to the second floor, which was just a cinder block room, like no windows, nothing. And we carried so much sound up those stairs. And I literally remember saying to Mike, the sound, I was like, what are you going to possibly do with all this sound? Like, you can't plug all this in this room. And he's like, we're going to kill people. And, and then the party ended up not happening. Like, Rich didn't want to risk crossing the border. It was all kinds of weirdness.
Shit.
But yeah, it was definitely just like, so much sound.
Oh man, I'll tell you what. I mean, I've done a couple parties in the States since I moved to Europe, but for the most part, I don't mess with it anymore. But I'm so over hauling speakers. Hauling it in isn't so bad because you're like, yeah, we're gonna have a kick-ass party.
Hauling it out,
but hauling it out at 7 a.m. after you've been up all night, and you clean the place up and clean up the puke and all that shit, and then you got to haul out, 20 dual-inch bass bins and load them into a truck. And usually it's in Minneapolis, it's the winter time because throwing a party in the summer is ridiculous. Everybody's out camping, so you're freezing your ass off. It's dark and cold, and you're like, I did this for fucking $200. You know what I mean? Like, of course you don't do it for just $200. It's for fun and stuff. But you're just like, I'm never doing this again. 3 months later, you're doing it again.
Well, it's bad enough carrying the speakers, and we get done with the speakers, and it's almost like, okay, now you got to move the amps.
Yeah,
and the amps are the heavy thing. Like,
the
amps are
and there's no way
part.
really to lift it. You kind of just got to shove it up the.
It's the worst.
So. And I mean, if you look at me, I'm not Mr. Muscular, so it's kind of even more difficult for me. So, in honesty, a lot of the times, like, I'd be trying to push me, like, Zahn, you just handle the logistics and the money. We'll take care of the speakers. And then I'm like, okay, awesome. And then 5 minutes, they're like, we need your help. I'm like, damn.
Yeah. I think I remember. I think we tried to do the math for that haunting party that didn't happen, and we literally carried a ton of speakers.
Yeah.
2 flights of stairs to the this warehouse space. Like we did the math, and then when we realized the party wasn't happening, it was right around when the next group of friends had shown up to help, and so we're just like, well, you guys are carrying them down the stairs.
Yeah,
like, I'm out of here. I'm done.
But going down the stairs almost is the easier part.
It is, but it's like you said, like. It's one thing to be lugging the speakers up the stairs when you're doing it for the party,
but
it's way worse to be carrying them down the stairs because the party's not happening. Like, that's a terrible feeling.
Well, I remember actually one of the last parties I did was we did a 15-year party for a production company in a couple years ago, 3 or 4 years ago now even. Anyway, long story short, all this we borrowed Zach's sound system, which is a lot of turbo sound. We loaded it up into a freight elevator once the party was over, and we broke the frickin' elevator, and the sound system was stuck in there. So now we had the venue owner just pissed, screaming at us. We had Zach pissed at us because we had thousands and thousands of sound wrapped up in this elevator shaft. We didn't know if it was going to break down or what. And, I think it was around $1,500 to fix the elevator. And, it was one of those, we were supposed to clean up days ago because this was so out of control, this party. It was one of the best ones we've thrown. But, yeah, even with the elevator, we thought we're going to get out easy, and hell no, we didn't.
No, what I mean? Made it worse.
Yeah.
Made it worse. But, so why don't we, let's take a break.
All right.
That's it for this episode of the Rave Curious podcast. Like I said at the beginning, this conversation continues on Dustin Zahn's podcast. It's called Trainwrecked with Dustin Zahn. And so if you want to hear us keep going, go ahead and download that podcast. If you're hearing this on the day it came out, which is a Tuesday, you have to wait till Wednesday or Thursday to get the second half. But if you're hearing this, a couple days after it came out, then the second half's already there. And even if it's not, go check out Trainwrecked. There's a lot of cool conversations with a lot of other DJs that are really entertaining. And I'll honestly say I think the half you're going to hear on Trainwrecked is actually more entertaining than what you just heard. The result of some caffeine and some alcohol, I think, loosened both me and Dustin up a little bit for the second half. So go over and check it out. Yeah, thanks for listening. If you want to follow us, Rave Curious Podcast on Facebook or at Rave Curious on Twitter. You can also subscribe on iTunes. And let me remind you once again that if you like it, please leave an iTunes review. That's it. We'll be back in 2 weeks with more conversations with players in the electronic music scene. Thanks for listening.